Hello everyone. Today I'm gonna be featuring something different. With all the emphasis on upcoming premium ships or reviewing premium ships, upcoming test ships, all this stuff going on, I'm gonna answer a question that people ask quite often. What are the top 10 tech tree ships that you can grind for? Basically, what is available in the silver tech tree. And the first one is going to be the Fiji. The Tier 7 Royal and Navy Light Cruiser. It only has access to AP, but that does in no way deter it. As you probably saw from those volleys on the DD, the fuse has a low arming threshold and a very short fuse, which means it fully arms on destroyers. And this ship has access to so many tools. The torpedoes, well, they can be launched in single lines, so anyone trying to push into your smoke, like this battleship here, will most oftentimes end up eating multiple torpedoes straight through the nose. Add in access to hydro, access to heal, smoke. The DPM is actually really monstrous. The DPM is 298,000, and that's in fact the same DPM that you get at the Edinburgh, which is a tier higher, but the Fiji gets access to it at tier 7 already. Now keep in mind that this ranking or this list isn't going to be some sort of ranking where number 1 is better than number 2 and number 2 is better than number 3 and so forth, because ultimately which tech tree ships you enjoy comes down to the player. Do you like DDs? Do you like cruisers? Do you like battleships? And what type of battleships do you like? What type of cruisers do you like? So obviously it will be very subjective. So it will just be a list of 10 ships that I consider absolutely excellent at their tier, and the Fiji absolutely earns that position. Most of the time, tier 7 cruisers, they have to give up significant things to get just access to one of the consumables that the Fiji has. If you want smoke, well, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. If you want radar or heal, it's also going to cost you a ton. But the Fiji kind of gets access to all of them, and they synergize beautifully. Hydro plus smoke keeps you safe from torpedoes and from incoming shell fire. Any sort of chip damage you take from blind fire or open water gunboating, well, you can use the heal to recover that. Add in the improved pen angles and the short fuse, and the AP is effective against pretty much all the ships in the game. There are exceptions, but even up tiered in against tier 9s, the Fiji can absolutely carry a flank. Hell, it can even carry a whole game. And although the Minotaur is a very strong ship as well, having to go through the Edinburgh and through the Neptune might not be the most enjoyable experience. That's why Fiji is my first pick for top tech tree ships. My second recommendation is the Kleber, or the Mogador, the tier 9 and tier 10 French destroyers. Now these destroyers, they trade concealment, and they trade smoke, and they don't get access to heal, for some absolutely ridiculous gun power. These 139mm guns that both the Mogador and the Kleber has the best AP penetration of all DDs. And what this means is that ships that normally hunt DDs, ships that normally are a huge issue for you, are in fact the ships that you hunt in return. Because combined with the reload booster and this incredible AP penetration, you are capable of citadeling all those pesky cruisers that normally make your life so painful. And this in combination makes it a fairly challenging ship to play, but on the other hand, a stupidly rewarding and so much fun to play, because you dip in and out, you're an assassin. You can play it as a long-range HE spammer if you so choose, but the assassin playstyle is something that just I find so stupidly fun, and the ability to basically get revenge on all those ships that have made your DD life so hard. Besides carriers, of course. No mistake that carriers will make your life much, much harder. But even though it looks squishy on the surface, it actually has a fairly unique saturation mechanic, which means that you end up being able to tank far more damage than you would expect you to be able to. And this makes both the Mogador and the Kleber, it's hard to pick one. I mean, maybe Mogador, it leads to Kleber, or maybe Kleber, because you get to play Mogador on the way. Add in usable torpedoes, stupidly fast speed, great shell ballistics. The things you lack is concealment, smoke, and AA. But those trade-offs you're more than willing to make because both the Kleber and Mogador are just so much fun to play. Trying to chase down a Mogador or Kleber like this Alaska is doing is honestly extremely dangerous because the great torpedo angles and the ability to launch both sides individually means that when you push into this ship, you're pushing into an unending wall of torpedoes plus a ton of HE or AP spam on the way. They're great at hunting other DDs, they're great at ambushing. They're not so good at continued damage because, well, they rely on the reload booster heavily to deal any damage. That doesn't mean that this isn't probably the most unique ship or unique style in the game right now, and I find it so enjoyable. In fact, Kleber might be one of my most played DDs in all of the last year. That's not to say that there are, of course, some issues, namely, well, you kind of power creep the hell out of the Khabarovsk. The Khabarovsk, poor thing, is no competition to these things. Khabarovsk lacks the torpedoes, lacks the firepower, lacks the AP damage. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about fun ships to grind, and both the Mogador and the Kleber absolutely deserve that place on the list. The earlier French DDs are not that fun to grind through. Trust me, I know it. I have tested them all and I thought they were quite horrendous. It gets better at tier 7, significantly better at tier 8, and once you get to Mogador, well, you're smiling. My third recommendation on the list is the Kremlin, the Soviet tier 10 battleship. Not only is the grind to the Kremlin very, very enjoyable, because basically all the ships are either good or extremely good on the way. You got the Pyotr Veliki, you got the Ismail, you got the Sinop, you got the Vladivostok, you got the Sovietsky Soyuz. Not a single one of those ships is actually bad, and some of them are insanely powerful. And Kremlin itself, well, it basically ticks all the boxes for reasons why you'd like to play a battleship. Do you want powerful guns? Check, that's something you're absolutely capable of. Do you want strong armor? In fact, one of the most enjoyable things about playing Battleship is the ability to push into the center of the enemy team and just cause havoc. Well, Kremlin, not only does it have access to these fast reloading damage cons, which means, well, you're not gonna be burning to death, it's also coated in 60mm plating, which means the large majority of HE will simply shatter on your upper belt and on your deck armor. Add in an icebreaker on the nose, well, you can't be citadeled through the nose by the likes of Yamato either. A strong torpedo belt, some of the best concealment of all tier 10 ships, some of the best rudder shift of tier 10 battleships, some of the best rudder shift, and of course 457mm guns with a 30-second turret traverse. The only weakness this ship has is the AA, that they keep nerfing on it, but ultimately that does not change the gaming experience of this ship in any way. Its supposed weakness is supposed to be poor long-range dispersion, but considering this is mostly the horizontal dispersion, not the vertical dispersion, you are still absolutely capable of blapping ships across the map. This is the ship that is terrifying to face against, and this is the ship that makes cruisers feel honestly quite helpless, because they cannot burn you and they cannot damage your hull, and in return you are overmatching every part of their armor. Kremlin is fundamentally so much fun to play. That's really what it comes down to. Kremlin makes you feel like the schoolyard bully in World of Warships. It's the one ship that can do the things I do in it often, which is basically charge straight through the middle into the enemy team without any fear of dying. If you happen to have access to Kuznetsov, the Soviet special commander, that thing makes your Kremlin even tankier, because it means that when you're about to die, you actually get a damage con and a heal popping off, so your survivability, which is already incredibly high, simply goes straight through the roof. Kremlin has no real weaknesses besides aircraft carrier focus. Even the weak broadside is a questionable vulnerability at close ranges. It is quite comfortable to play, and it is very, very powerful in the right hands, and even in the hands of a beginner. Well, as long as you don't give everyone a flat broadside or eat torpedoes, you will absolutely be enjoying your time in this ship. Kremlin is what many other battleships could only hope to be, and that is why it deserves its spot on this list. As my fourth recommendation, I have the Kinta Casa, the IGN Tier 9 gunboat destroyer. Now the thing does have access to torpedoes. You can launch 6 of them with a fairly large cooldown, or fairly long cooldown, and with the reload booster you can launch a total of 12. But it's not the torpedoes that are the selling point. Even if they hit hard, they have a long reload, no. The selling point of the Kinta Casa is the absolutely, completely ridiculous DPM of this ship. The Kinta Casa does more damage than basically any other tier 9 cruiser. We're not even comparing it to destroyers, we're comparing it to cruiser. The sheer damage output of this ship is completely ridiculous. Add in the fact that it's got a 5.9 km concealment, and unlike the Harugumo, which comes after it, it does not eat full battleship penetrations. So we have a stealthy, somewhat agile, I'm not gonna call it fully agile, it's clumsier than most of them, but the sheer amount of damage it puts out is completely ridiculous. It also has improved penetration because the IGN 100mm guns have improved pen. So if you spec IFHE, you can pen well over the 32mm threshold, which is the standard threshold of basically all battleships in the game. This, combined with the sheer insane DPM, and the concealment, and of course the smoke, means that the Kinta Casa is one of the most frustrating ships to deal with in the game. You try to push in a battleship, Kinta Casa smokes up in front of you, and the rain of fire starts. You also can't take the risk of rushing it, because, well, he might have 6 of those IGN torpedoes ready, and even if he doesn't, he might have the reload booster consumable ready, which means, well, he can get access to those hard-hitting torpedoes as well. Kinta Casa has been considered honestly quite overpowered for quite some time. There has been a fair bit of competition at tier 9, the likes of the Black and the Benham and even the Jutland, but Kinta Casa still reigns as the king when it comes to sheer damage output. You might not start too many fires with the IFHE build, but who really cares when you're getting full penetrations on almost all the shells, even against battleships, and this allows you to melt destroyers, cruisers, battleships alike. And add in that the health pool is very healthy with Survivability Expert, almost 24,000. This thing is not easy to take down, and this thing is a terrifying opponent for any other destroyer. Combination of concealment, health and insane DPM means that, well, unless you're a Jutland that can smoke up, or a Black that can smoke and radar at the same time, you're gonna struggle to deal with the Kinta Casa. Kinta Casa has always been a monster, and the Kinta Casa still is a monster, and absolutely deserves to be on my list of top tech tree ships in the game. My 5th recommendation is the Yamato. The legendary Yamato. Now this thing has been around since the very start of the game, and it is still relevant, it is still a strong battleship. This is probably the single most resistant ship to any sort of power creep in the game. And the reason for this is, of course, the 460mm guns. Somewhat accurate, I won't say super accurate because they can be trollish, but especially with the legendary module, the guns are accurate, and more importantly, the guns have a huge amount of punch behind them. This allows you to overmatch 32mm of plating, and this in return will always give the Yamato relevance. Even with the addition of various new ships that have icebreakers and are capable of shattering or bouncing your AP and so forth, Yamato's gun consistency has kept it in the game for something like, what, 4 years? And there's bonus points, of course, for the fact that, well, this ship actually existed. Yamato is very much a real ship, and this, of course, adds some satisfaction to playing it, especially if you're anything of a history buff. But ultimately, it has its fair share of weaknesses. It has no AA. It has a huge citadel, and it's got multiple weaknesses, both from the front and the back, which can be punched through and citadeled. And of course it has probably, I think, the slowest turret traverse of all tier 10 battleships. None of that matters though, because the one thing that the Yamato does so very well is shooting other ships, regardless of what ships. Even battleships trying to push in, nose in towards you, they can bounce most of the time. Against the Yamato, they just get overmatched and they get blapped. Cruisers YOLOing you are, of course, always a threat. Also are DDs YOLOing you, but if you are prepared, well, running into these guns isn't really fun for any of them. Even DDs trying to rush you if you have HE loaded will regret it, because IGN HE hits like an absolute truck. Overall though, I won't go too much into detail on the Yamato because I did quite recently feature it in a positioning guide, but Yamato is a fantastic battleship, not just because of its strengths, but also because it's quite a valuable tool at teaching you how to play the game. The Yamato is a battleship that punishes you extremely heavily if you misplay or misposition. It's one of the reasons I also like the North Carolina. If you mess up in the ship, it will hurt you, and it will hurt you bad. In fact, when it comes to devastating strikes against other tier 10 battleships, Yamato is probably the #1 featured ship. Yamato or Conqueror, both of them have huge citadels, and if you're caught broadside, aka pants down, you will regret it. Regardless, Yamato deserves its place on this list, even if some of the IGN battleship line has suffered a fair bit from power creep, like the likes of Nagato and Amagi. Izumo has gotten a fair bit of buffs, and Fuso is still as strong as ever, and Yamato itself is worth grinding for, if for nothing else, for the guns alone. As number 6 on the list, I have probably one of the best overall DDs at tier 10 right now, which is the Daring. You just saw one of the main reasons why it's so good: multiple fast reloading smokes. Very fast reloading, you got plenty of them, so if a carrier does send rocket planes your way, you don't have to rely on any sort of AA values, you can just smoke up whenever you feel like it, and it will be available very quickly again. Add in the fact that grinding to the Daring is very enjoyable, because, well, you go through the likes of Jervis, Lightning and Jutland, all of which are either good or just straight up excellent destroyers, especially the Jutland. The Daring itself, well, it's got access to Hydro, Smoke and Heal. It's got improved AP angles, which means you can actually use the AP against DDs, which gives you monstrous DPM. Well, you can use it against everything, of course. It's got good, really good HE DPM, usable torpedoes, handles well, great concealment. It used to have the downside that you needed to spec IFHE, but that downside has been removed with the IFHE rework, and now you can penetrate enemy destroyers without having to spec that, which means you can get RPF instead, which allows you to, of course, get the information of where enemy destroyers are, which makes hunting them and killing them oh so much easier. The ship is straight up overpowered, I would say, for tier 10. The sheer amount of damage this thing can do, combined with all the utility it provides, means that many other DDs are just being left in the shade. The fact that it has access to Hydro as well as Smoke means that, unlike most DDs that can be torped or at least somewhat harassed in smoke, this thing can sit and farm in complete safety until actually radared or blind fired to the extent that it's forced back. Enemy ships giving broadside, well, they will suffer from the DPM heavily. Nose-in battleships, nose-in ships, well, they will suffer from the HE DPM and the fire starting capacity heavily. Any other DD is trying to fight it, well, not only is it extremely tanky at 24.3k, it has access to all the heals, and it's got a great turret setup with 2 front turrets, and of course, once again, very fast reloading smokes means that pretty much every single fight you take in the Daring will most likely end up favoring you. The Daring is a great all-rounder. There is nothing the Daring doesn't do well, except maybe shoot down planes. It doesn't shoot down planes well, but when you have smokes to hide in, you don't really need that anyway. The Daring absolutely deserves to be on the list because not only is it incredibly powerful against basically every possible ship type you can face, it's also very, very fun to play. Because you're never in that situation where, for example, in the Gearing, if you smoke up because a carrier comes your way, well, you just lost a third of your consumables and now you have to wait something like 2.5 minutes to get it again. There's none of those downtimes with the Daring. The Daring is, because of the fast consumables and how much utility it has, Daring is basically non-stop action. If you're not torpedoing, you're shooting. If you're not shooting, you're moving into a better position to take your shot. Daring, well, overpowered, pretty simple word compared to especially the likes of something like a Gearing, which has obviously been pretty horrendously powercraft when it comes to the all-rounder destroyer. It deserves to be on this list because there's no other DD that can do the things it does right now. At number 7 of recommended Tech Tree ships, we have the Venezia. Keep in mind that the Venezia does have improved pen angles on the SAP compared to the rest of the Tech Tree line, which means that the SAP is significantly more consistent on the Venezia than on, for example, the Brindisi at tier 9. The gimmick of the Venezia is of course that it has access to SAP, semi-armor piercing, which is basically a type of HE that can't start fires but and can be angled against to some extent, but hits like an absolute truck and will arm on even the thinnest of platings, which means you can use it to blap destroyers and upper belts of battleships or just cruisers in general. Great shell ballistics and honestly, flat arcs means that it's a very accurate and powerful ship against any ships vulnerable to SAP. On the other hand, ships like Kremlin basically completely shrug you off because that thing has 60mm plating and you only pen 54mm. It handles well. The rudder shift is average, but once you start turning, the turning circle is excellent. With spotter plane and with Sansonetti, you can get some excellent range on this ship, and you can consistently blap any ship across the map. You also have a good armor profile on it, and overall the ship is very fun to play, especially thanks to the creeping smoke that allows you to disengage when you mess up or just do some crazy aggressive moves. Now, there's been a fair bit of talk of this ship actually being overpowered. The reason for this is, of course, for those that follow clan battles. Well, in clan battles, the Venezia is a very popular pick. In fact, no one plays any other cruisers anymore, and there's been a lot of talk that, well, this is obviously because the Venezia is overpowered, which to me is rather amusing because it just shows how short of a memory people actually have. You see, Venezia hasn't actually been significantly changed at all for a long time. It's exactly the same as it was the previous 2 clan battle seasons, and I didn't see anyone complain about it being overpowered then. I didn't see it dominating the picks back then either. In fact, last King of the Sea, which was just like, what, 2-3 months ago? Well, Venezia was exactly the same as it is now, and we saw multiple games where no one picked it. In fact, it was one of the least popular picks. So why is it suddenly overpowered now? Well, that's because there are carriers in clan battles. And when there's carriers in clan battles, that means there's no battleship, for example a Kremlin, which completely laughs at the Venezia, which obviously gives the Venezia much better survivability. The other thing is, Venezia no longer has to push into close ranges to spot for itself. The carrier does that for it, which means it can just use the great ballistics to its advantage at all times. Also, carrier means that there are no DDs, so there's no need for radar, there's no need to worry about you being spotted when you smoke up because there's someone nearby. No DDs also means less torpedoes, which means the lack of hydro is no longer a weakness. So do I fully agree with the argument that the Venezia is suddenly such an overpowered ship? No. In a random battle, it's basically still exactly the same as before. It's just the fact that the carrier has completely offset the balance in clan battles, which means that, well, the Venezia seems quite ridiculous. That is, of course, just my take on it. Is perhaps the fuel smoke a bit too long, being able to go invulnerable for such a long time? A bit silly? Possible, but then again, it is a series of trade-offs. And the thing is, in its current situation, it gets away with those trade-offs because no DD, no battleship, and a carrier to provide all the spotting and all the long-range information required. Still though, we're not here to talk about balance, we're talking about recommended ships, and I think the Venezia is absolutely recommended to grind. It is a really fun ship, a fun play style, and the ability to blap any ship, especially if they give broadside, can be incredibly satisfying, and this one does deserve to be grinded. At number 8, oh man, this video is starting to get really long. I'm gonna have to speed it up a bit. At number 8, I will put the Holland. Pretty much the only tier 10 destroyer that can actually pose a threat to carrier planes right now. Tired of being farmed by planes? Well, the tier 9 and tier 10 both have access to excellent AA. It doesn't mean you're invulnerable, but it does mean that you can make their life very painful. Add into that fact that you got decent concealment, good firepower, access to a heal, and the fastest torpedoes in the game. They also reload very quickly when you get access to captains like Jerzy Swirsky or just go low HP with Adrenaline Rush kicking in, which means that you become a massive torpedo threat. Fast reloading, super fast torpedoes, heal, AA, it's a fun ship to play. There is really no ships that you can take on quite well. The big downsides is of course that having no access to smoke and not really being the fastest ship means that if you miss position, you're not gonna get out of that position alive either, because it has no convenient way to go undercover. Regardless, the Holland absolutely deserves to be a grinded ship because it's fun. Fast torpedoes, that means consistent hits, and the fact that you get access to these super narrow spreads means that you have less of those situations where you line up a perfect torpedo and then you watch as a huge gap develops all around the enemy ship, and then you get frustrated. Well, I launched that perfectly, but I wasn't rewarded at all. It helps also that from tier 8 onwards, the European DD line is actually very enjoyable to play, especially the Östergötland, the tier 9, is in my opinion in contention for one of the better tier 9 destroyers in the game. This all obviously leads to Holland deserving its place on the list of tech tree ships I recommend grinding.
We sank their battleship.
At number 9, some of my personal bias is absolutely showing, because I love the North Carolina. The North Carolina is a battleship that basically teaches you how to play battleships. The shell velocity is some of the slowest of BBs, but most of the time the guns are very rewarding, provided you aim correctly, which will take some learning to do. It is a fairly tanky ship when you're angled, it's quite stealthy, it handles quite decently, but on the other hand, if you do give broadside in this thing, you tend to get punished very hard. In fact, I often say that the NC is like the training wheels of a battleship player. If someone is good at playing the North Carolina, they're pretty much going to be good at playing any other battleship in the game. Because all the fundamentals of battleship gameplay come together with the North Carolina. That is patience, waiting carefully for your shot, taking a significant lead. You have to predict where the enemy is going if you actually want to hit them. But you still have access to these 406mm guns, which can absolutely deal with higher tier ships very well as well. And the firing angles are good, and overall the ship can perform excellently, provided you trust in it and you allow it to do it. If you overextend, you have not much of a torpedo belt. You do have a citadel that can be quite easily punished, especially when broadside, at quite significant range as well. The NC is by no means a tanky battleship, especially now with the likes of, for example, Vladivostok being added to the game. That does not mean that I still don't enjoy the ship, that I don't consider it to be honestly a pinnacle of battleship gameplay design in World of Warships, because it is everything that I wanted from a battleship. Hard-hitting, punchy guns, rewarding good aim, and punishing poor play. That absolutely means the NC is on my list, but on the other hand, that also means that you'll have to go through the New York, the New Mexico, and the Colorado, which I wouldn't call a very enjoyable experience. So, this one, I will readily admit, comes with a large flavor of Flamu bias. As we move towards the very end of the list, number 10, well, this is where the choice actually got really difficult for me. I chose the Hindenburg because, well, I've always been a fan of the Hindenburg. I've enjoyed the playstyle of the Hindenburg, and I just like the variety of tools you have available. Basically, you got your incredible HE, 50mm penetration against any angled targets. If someone is dumb enough to actually give you broadside and lets you use that Hindenburg AP, well, that does some absolutely filthy damage as well. And this ship has gotten a fair few buffs over the last couple of years. More importantly, recently the Gunther Lutyens captain was added, and you just saw me proc his special skill which gives you a 7.5% faster reload on your main guns when you proc it. So all of this combined has made the Hindenburg a rather disgusting DPM monster, capable of melting basically any target you face. Hell, even the Kremlin should you spec for IFHE. It does have its fair share of weaknesses. Obviously, the AA is somewhat debatable, which in the current meta is a significant weakness. It also has access to no radar, which especially with ships like Holland being added and just ships like Småland sitting in a smoke farming you, can also be considered a significant weakness. It's not that fast either, it doesn't handle that well. The 30mm plating that it used to have that kind of set it, well, gave it some extra tankiness. Well, with all these 457mm guns being added to the game, obviously you get overmatched significantly more than in the past. Regardless of all these things though, the one thing the Hindenburg tends to do really well, provided it has opportunities to use them, is to deal damage. Either with AP, HE, or torpedoes, or anything, and basically at almost any range. With the spotter plane you can get some truly ridiculous range on the ship, even without building for range. In fact, I build the ship for reload, and just using the spotter plane is more than enough for me to get access to basically every part of the map. Kremlin does make the list. That doesn't mean it was like such an easy pick. I had a couple of others, and the other one that was heavily competing for this spot was the Des Moines. The Des Moines is also a ship that, well, that thing has stayed, unlike the Hindenburg that hasn't stayed that relevant in clan battles, well, the Des Moines has stayed relevant in clan battles basically ever since release, and is also a stupidly strong ship. So I would say the tier 10 place is kind of split between Des Moines and Hindenburg. I'm just biased here. The other ship that I considered also adding here was actually the Thalwing. I don't think you can't quite grind it yet, but obviously this is going to be the grindable tier 8 Soviet cruiser, and I think this thing is an absolute monster. The AP is basically on par with the Baltimore in terms of pen. I think it was better, but with incredible shell ballistics. You have access to great torpedo angles, which combined with your Prince Eugen hull, which means of course a turtleback, means that you don't really get citadeled at close ranges at all, and this combination gives you incredible YOLO power against basically any battleship in the game. It also has access to obviously hydro, a good health pool for a tier 8, and radar. But most importantly, what you will be probably using the most in this ship is that long-range AP power, which is just really satisfying. Improved pen angles, short fuse, great penetration, great shell velocity. You can just blap any ship you want with it, including higher tier ships. All of these things combined has easily placed the Tallinn already on my list of potentially fantastic tech tree ships to grind. In fact, when it comes to potential 1 versus 1s, if that thing comes back, it used to be tier 8, I could see the Tallinn being a very strong competitor, because unlike, for example, Eugen and Hipper that used to be really good as well, this thing also has radar, so much more utility than the rest of them. Keep in mind it's stealth radar, something I don't particularly like being added back to the game, but in terms of efficiency, it cannot be underestimated. That was my list. This thing ended up being, oh my god, more than half an hour long. Wow. If anyone actually watches this, well done to all of you. I hope you enjoyed it. This has been asked of me several times, and I finally got around to making one. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will talk to you guys later, and yes, 100,000 subs is right around the corner. Thank you for your support, as always.